Dr. Amy McGrath joins me now. Dr. McGrath is the president of the H.S. Chapman Society on Electoral Fraud. She also helped found the H.S. Chapman Society in Britain, among a whole lot of other accomplishments. She's an accomplished writer. And I first came across her work thanks to one of the listeners, but then had the pleasure of meeting Dr. McGrath and have got a copy here in front of me of her latest piece, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing. And I know a number of you have, as we've mentioned this over the last few weeks, wanted to know where you can get it, how you can get it, and Dr. McGrath, I'm told, is now into a third print run, I think, on this. And this morning what we're going to do is go through in some depth her intimate knowledge of what has been going on in regard to the Fabian Society, Agenda 21, the United Nations, left in politics, Gorbachev and more. And it's something I know many of you were very interested in. So without further ado, Dr. Amy McGrath, welcome to the studio.
Oh, well, thank you very much for asking me, and those wonderful hearers of yours out there waiting to hear what I say.
Yes, well, you're onto a third print run now, aren't you, with this?
Yes, I am. But it's given me a rest for a month on issuing the books because I'm a one-man band.
I don't know where to start. Perhaps we should start at the beginning, as they say. And this latest tome of yours, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, is, I guess, tied together with the sinew of the Fabian Society. For the uninitiated, who were the Fabian, or what was the Fabian Society, and where are they now?
The Fabians were back in 1884, they were Marxists, and Marx at that stage had only, 20-30 years before produced his manifesto. And the two of them got together. One was Webb, and the other was Shaw, George Bernard Shaw, he was a playwright, wasn't he?
Yes, Irish playwright.
And Webb, his wife seemed to be part of the show. She was running the show. But they decided that they weren't Marxist in the sense that Marx said that the proletariat would rise, and they said the proletariat wouldn't rise, that they only want to improve themselves, but the middle class would destroy itself, and that was what they would do. But to do that, they had to create a program of what they called creeping communism. In that sense, they said the revolutions wouldn't work. They would pretend to be something nice, who would do all nice things for you, welfare and all the rest of it.
Yes.
And to hide the fact that they really were going to have a revolution, they built a window. They shared a home, and they built a window in stained glass showing the two of them on their real program with an anvil. Each had an anvil, and the earth was on the anvil, and they each had a hammer on either side to smash the earth.
To create a new world order, really, wasn't it?
A new world order.
Yes. And, of course, on that same window, this is now in
Yes.
the London School of Economics in safekeeping, I think, isn't it? But, as you say, at the British headquarters, on the same window was in the shield a wolf wrapped in the white gown of a sheep.
Well, that is right. It was portrayed on the cover. And so you take them for sheep when they're really wolves.
That's quite metaphoric of what they're about, though, isn't it?
Yes, yes, it is. I was just crossing my mind. I actually first came across communists because my best friend was a relative of Sidney Webb.
Runs in the blood.
Yes, I hadn't told you that. But anyway, the result of that was that G.B. Shaw just got more and more and more outrageous in his support of communism, and when he went to Russia eventually in 1930s. But they started the London School of Economics, and in fact, they trained Lenin. Without them, Lenin wouldn't have existed or gone to Russia. And they did that when he only had 17 followers by financing him, giving him premises in a Christian church. I thought it was rather dreadful.
That's right, in Britain, wasn't it?
Yes, in Britain.
So here we are now in 2013 with that background in mind. We have a Prime Minister who we know is still, as far as I'm aware, a member of the Fabian Society. We've had many Prime Ministers.
You've had at least 6 or 8 members of the Fabian Society. I would say 6 because they had at one stage and then it dropped, and then after World War II it was restarted, I think 1947.
Yes.
And we've had 6 Fabian Prime Ministers, which means there have been 6 Communist Prime Ministers.
Now, how many people do you think out there know that's the background of these people?
How many people know the background?
Well, how many people do you think know that a number of our leading political figures have this background?
Nobody. It's the best kept secret. This is one of the great, of six, what I think, scams of the last century that have been perpetrated against us, because they don't want us to know that they want to destroy Australia as we know it and the civilization we have. And it's a difficult thing for people to believe when everybody wants to get here.
Yeah. So with that in mind, what is it that the Fabian initiated, be they at the lowest level of the branch membership, if you know what I mean, or indeed as a Prime Minister or a Cabinet Minister, what is it that they have in mind with that background that they want to do to our society?
Well, I would say that you could start with some that I knew. Dr. Coombs, nobody knew really throughout his career that Dr. Coombs was a rabid communist. He created post-war reconstruction during the war, and this incriminates both Chifley and Curtin in some respects. And Coombs deliberately was, as a graduate of London School of Economics, he was a one world government man, post-war reconstruction, then governor of Commonwealth Bank for 6 prime ministers. They did a lot of damage because they looked such respectable people. And why do I know all this? Because he was the very best friend of my cousin, and her cousin's husband, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, when you're talking about the one world government, I guess that's through the auspice of the United Nations.
Yes, because they were working hand in glove with Dr. Everett and Chifley, both of whom were communists, and they post-war construction was filled with communists. I know that because I was there briefly till I discovered they were all communists in the 1940s.
Yes.
And that was when Everett started the United Nations, when he was president.
What about on domestic policy fronts, though, before we look internationally? Of course, what we're seeing at the moment is a lot of class warfare, divide and conquer. In your book, in fact, on page 24, you say another of Lenin's strategies for multiplying the power and strength of the small dedicated group of revolutionaries was to exploit the differences between non-communist groups so as to incite one against the other. It seems, with the rhetoric coming from the Treasurer, the Prime Minister, who we know is a Fabian, and others, that's exactly what's going on here with the class warfare, the 1% comments, all of this.
Well, to be fair to them, they didn't envisage the total annihilation of half the human race like the Gorbachev.
No.
They were more, in some ways, in looking for a fairer society, but they equally had to admit it meant a total change of the society it was. And I don't think people really wanted that to be changed. After all, it works so well, supremely well, that the President of India in recent years went to Britain to thank Britain for what they'd done in introducing the same type of society there as we have.
So basically, I guess, are they trying to replace what would be a social meritocracy with something different?
Well, they say they're against capitalism at the core of everything they do.
Yes.
They say that capitalism is the cause of all ills. But that's highly questionable. But at the same time, a new element's been introduced, which is in wolves in sheep's clothing, and that is that we're totally new element. They want a new anti-capitalism to confine it, to take away all the civilization we've got in having private ownership of homes. They want to nationalise all the land and housing. Now that has been, as we know from Russia and China, always been the object, to nationalise all private ownership. And this is, unfortunately, what all these multiple conferences with this vast organisations being developed of people at the top of the pyramid of wanting change. You know, they're all oligarchs and ex-leaders, and I make that plain in this book, that these people still at the core want to destroy, to create. And this is why the nationalisation of land has been going on for the last 30 years in Australia, advanced by those in power. But I haven't said much about that in this book, much more about the sort of attitude or state of mind that thinks they could destroy private ownership or and also to make the point these people are among us. They're not over there in Europe.
Yes.
In a lot of the organisations are, but we do have to know that for quite some time we've had members of David Rockefeller's, which I mention here in this book.
It's in the book, yes.
David Rockefeller's at the head of this structure, oligarchic structure, which couldn't be more anti-democratic. Nobody ever hears what they do. Nobody's seen what they do, to the extent when I started telling them what they had been doing from 1969, and to one of our board members, Alistair Webster, who had been on deputy director of the Environmental Committee when they sold us to the United Nations in 1992 with Agenda 21.
Yes.
I had to tell him about it 20 years later, and he was deputy chair of the Environmental Committee. These people kept such a secret, and this is what I'm trying to do, expose the secrecy.
Yes.
Because that is where we don't get a vote.
There's an ideology at play, though, isn't there? It's more than just individuals who might have let's say, a socialist leaning in their political spectrum. And you point out a lot of it is driven from European and American schools, for lack of a better term. But there is a coherent ideology at play, not just here, but in other, particularly Western advanced economies, isn't there, where these people are, as you say, through frontal organisations, through lovely terminology, enacting the Fabian ideology.
Yeah, well, it's idealistic, and the part of the problem is that students no longer learn history. Now, I had all the European history when I was a child, and I should mention to your listeners I'm 91. This is why I can do the book. Yes. I've been through 4 generations. We learnt the whole of European history. They don't even do it if they don't want to. So they've got no measurement of what was before. And it does sound idealistic, and once they stir the pot about you have to have a change. Gillard does it every day.
And who could argue against lovely-sounding things like sustainable development, progress?
Well, at first it was environmentalism, and they decided that didn't confuse people enough. So they changed that about 1988, and the runner-up to Agenda 21. But also it's been kept secret, 2 things, fully kept secret, is that our Prime Minister signed up to this, and the fact that there even was such a thing as Agenda 21, because I only learnt about it a year ago, and I've only met 2 people in a whole year who heard of it, right up till people I had lunch with in Brisbane on Monday.
Yes.
Nobody's heard of it. What governments are these who do not tell us that and that the Labour Party changed its platform in 1991? We've never heard about that.
No. And they changed from what to what?
To pursue all the United Nations policies.
Instead of nationalistic policies.
I don't think we've ever given them permission to do this.
I doubt their members have even given them permission to do this.
No. But for me to tell a man, that deputy director of the committee, that all these things had happened in 1992, why did it ever go to Parliament? And you raised the whole question, I think it's in this book, about treaties. Now,
yes.
Whitlam made 35 treaties way back when he came in, and the question is whether they have to go to Parliament at all. I think needs to be addressed long before an Aboriginal. What is local governments go? A referendum, local governments.
Yes.
We need a referendum on can the government sign all these treaties without anybody knowing.
Now, on Agenda 21, a large part of your book is dedicated to that, from about page 88 onwards. In fact, probably even before that in the book. And you say here that in America, for example, Bill Clinton was a president who signed Executive Order 312858, creating a presidential council on so-called sustainable development. And from there it basically rolled. How has it affected the American political sphere?
Well, it has, because somewhere around those times they started giving the presidential decree, right, presidential decree. And in fact, they began to the Agenda 21, they began nationalising the land, and they came up with a NAFTA plan as to a complete plan of all the land in America and in Australia.
North American Free Trade
This
Agreement.
is for the biodiversity program, the land you could go on, the land you couldn't. And they were going to make 50% of the land that you couldn't for wild animals and so on.
Is that what we might call a national park?
Yes, that was in 1992.
Yes.
And the plan was already prepared. And it was quite nutty because it's planned for us to be all corralled in communes. We're going to have to eat less, produce less. They're trying to stop us now eating a bit less beef.
Well, they're using global warming as the excuse because the flatulent cows.
Well, they're using that as an excuse for change, total change.
Yes.
But it's just a complete fraud. It's one of the 6 frauds we've been exposed to. And that's how we're forming this organisation, Alliance of Property Rights, like they did in Alabama.
The Alliance of Property Rights.
Is evict the United Nations, because all this Agenda 21 has been created by the United Nations, which have been dominated by communists since it was founded in 1948.
Because you say in the book here, in fact, at the start, page 85 is where it really starts about Agenda 21, and you say, what is Agenda 21? If you do not know about it, you should. And, which is a good point. Further down you say sustainable development, which we just mentioned as the cute cuddly term for it. Sounds like a nice idea, right? It sounds nice, you say, until you scratch the surface and find that Agenda 21 and sustainable development are really cloaked plans to impose the tenets of social justice / socialism on the world. It's the ideological wolf in sheep's clothing, isn't it?
Well, yes, I mean, it's this side, and these nebulous statements like social justice. In fact, it's what they call governance. It's a very important point you raise. It's what they call governance. And we actually now have the United Nations, because they opened the door for them to come in. We now have a total parallel government run by UN through our mayors. That's why they want to put them in the Constitution. And then they'll knock the states out and we'll have totalitarianism. But these ideas are coming from such a myriad of organisations. I think I make that point. They call it a giant octopus. It's deliberately designed like a terrible cobweb that you'll get stuck in parts of it. That's why we're just going for what they did in Alabama. The first people to do it is evict the United Nations. But they're responsible for the whole web.
Is it possible, though? Because there are so many treaties signed, there's so many legal obligations.
Of course it is, if we've got the will to do it. They've done it in a number of states now in America. But talking about the executive decrees,
yes,
that Clinton and particularly Obama, they've used executive authority to hire staff to go out pushing the Agenda 21 throughout America. And it's caused a lot of grief. And the reason why... You remember the wild rivers in Queensland?
Of course, yes.
I've mentioned right at the front of the book, because I only found out the last minute, about the Alabama boys, who were first to take the UN on, 2 blokes from Rainbow Crossing. One because they'd made in this NAFTA plan his cattle ranch. He was also a pilot. A wild river. He said he was left with the ranch, and he couldn't use the water to water his cattle. And had to pay the taxes. Well, that's why there's been a revolt in America. And Obama has actually used the executive decree 913 times in 3 years.
Which is a record, isn't it?
And eight presidents before him only used 113 between them.
It's as if he's at war with his own people. This is
what in 3 years he's done. He's running a dictatorship because it's innate in the progress of this thing. It will move towards totalitarianism. You see, they've got one office down here, ICLEI, in Melbourne, and this was created by Agenda 21. Keating's government opened the door to ICLEI, which was International Local Government Initiatives. And that is why we must understand from this book the background of the people who have signed up to this and biodiversity. Now, the 2 things I should mention that the ICLEI don't go into this one, that'll be down the track, not far away. But ICLEI is now called Oceania, which is the name of one of the region that we're going to be number 9 in One World Government.
So you've got something, for example, like the
One
European Union. You've got the European Union. You've got North America.
Yes, that's right.
Oceania.
And we are Oceania. And with New Zealand, we're going to rule together. And Rockefeller at this moment is paying someone to go through Indonesia on our behalf. It's sort of an alternative foreign policy at the moment. We've got an alternative government, which is called governance, who are now walking into people's properties. But this was all generated and has to be understood, the background of the first book here, to understand frightful time the farmers are having because those treaties were signed.
Well, of course, yesterday morning I spoke at length to Dr. Amy McGrath, author of Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, about the Fabian Society, in particular the creeping influence of the United Nations Agenda 21 and the unelected, I stress, officials therein making decisions on our behalf, in essence destroying our sovereignty. Well, now in this second part of the discussion, I'd like to move things on a little bit to look at groups like Get Up, issues such as immigration, and individuals of great global influence, such as George Soros and Mikhail Gorbachev. Actually, speaking of Gorby, Dr. McGrath, I wonder if you could tell us about his continued global clout.
Now, Gorbachev's glasnost is a great hoax. It was done to amuse the world. They all gave him standing ovations for breaking up communism and lie to bemuse us. And he was launched in Brisbane. Now, that place, we think we don't matter, but we're the second biggest target in the world because we have more minerals than any other country but one. And we're strategic centre, so we must wake up. We're the most vulnerable country in the world. Now, he came back in 2006. I had lunch with people in Brisbane that didn't even know he'd been there, teaching pagan songs to 10,000 children of Mother Earth. Maurice Strong was even battier than he is, as people use the term now.
He's off the wall, yes.
Battier, because Agenda 21, he had all his Mother Earth hymns outside while they passed all this dreadful legislation. And they formed a university, peace university, in Costa Rica on a mountain where they said Mother Earth Gaia, they worship Gaia, Mother Earth, as the new religion. I think we might going back pre-Egypt.
Well, Craig Emerson belongs there, good old Dr. Craig Emerson, you might have seen in The Australian just last week. He was writing a piece about how, we've got to be more loving towards Mother Earth. She's the mother of us all, and, eat less meat, that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, I think
the trade minister.
I think that Gorbachev's gone a bit bonkers because he's adored. Now he's got 3.5 million people and all these offices. Who's paying for all these offices? Is our money supposed to go to the third world paying for his offices?
Well,
I mean, in other words, Russia is still running him. That's what we have to remember.
Yes. Now, of Gorbachev, in the book on page 101, in fact, you point out that, of course, the former president of the USSR, co-author of the Earth Charter, and you say that the emerging environmentalism of our civilizations and the need for vigorous action and priority in the interests of our community will inevitably have multiple political consequences, and perhaps the most important of them will be a gradual increase in the status of the United Nations. Inevitably, you say, it will assume some aspects of world government.
Well, that's what they're trying to do incrementally, because you look at each organisation that's there and mentioned in the book, and they all produce another 6. I've got lists there of long lists of these things with all these strange names. And you're a bit buried. Who do you go to?
There's a community frontal organisations, aren't they?
Pardon?
These are like a community frontal organisation.
No, they're not. They've formed them at the top. Various branches of the this web of governance committees, which we're all paying for, but they're putting a world government in place. And you have to look at the list of some of those that are there. It's very frightening and very worrying.
You also point out that Gorbachev actually said these words, that the principles of the Earth Charter will be a new form of the Ten Commandments, as you said. He went on to say, quote, they will lay the foundation for a sustainable global Earth community.
Well, they've been putting that in. They're putting it in, they've been putting it in really, I'd say from 1980.
Yep.
They began creating these organisations and subdividing them, and they've created. They always create a huge army. What they mean by government is a public service, like 1,000 people in Canberra being in the climate department.
No.
Which I can't imagine. I was brought up in Canberra in the public service. I can't imagine what they do.
Not
and there's
a lot.
Another 5. One called Australian Greenhouse that Tony Abbott said he'll close down. I think he said he'll close down the
Climate Commission.
Environment. But there's another one, I forget its name, that's doing something in that. See, the biodiversity program, to get back to that, was also part of Agenda 21. Biodiversity is setting aside land. That setting aside land is for the native creatures in Australia. But the bushfires, because they don't do the burn-off, actually, they can get away if it's burnt off. The animals get away mostly and breed. But when you have let it go, they're annihilated. Koalas
Yes.
will annihilate. Now, all this money is being spent for this biodiversity from the Agenda 21, but it's really setting aside land to obey the protocols of the United Nations. But it doesn't apply here. It might apply in smaller countries. You get these global principles.
Of course, if they were true environmentalists, true greenies, they would know these sort of things. But what this proves, and you point this out that they're not.
They're carbon sinks.
Carbon sinks,
in this absolute nonsense of carbon sinks.
It's just dreamland.
What they've done is paralyse us with all these programs. But what she doesn't know, that there's no wildlife left. Do you know why? There are 10 million wildcats. They kill up to 5 or God knows how many each night. And there are nearly as many as wild dogs that go in packs, and they're killing sheep all down the Alps in New South Wales. They're killing cattle, old cattle, and my offsider in the Peter Bruin in the Chapman Society as a public officer and so on, and also in this, he lost 75 lambs in one night. He's actually owned 3 properties.
He didn't lose them to global warming.
No. So they never speak. Gillard doesn't ever speak about it. So she's taking land for another reason.
Yes.
But it's not wildlife.
Well, exactly, and that's the point I was getting to when you say they're using these so-called concerns about the environment for a greater picture, and as you point out here, you said that it's all about promoting the agenda of control. And you give us some quotes. I mean, for example, Paul Watson, the co-founder of Greenpeace, says it doesn't matter what Agenda 21 is, it's the blueprint. It only matters what people believe is true. You also point out that Lester Brown from the World Watch Institute said this, quote, nations are in effect ceding portions of their sovereignty to the international community and beginning to evolve a new system of international environmental government as a means of solving otherwise unmanageable problems.
Yes, well, we are losing sovereignty. How do you get it back unless we all say get rid of United Nations? That's the only way you can do it.
What's the process needed for that?
Pardon?
What is the process? How would one begin to get rid of the UN?
I brought the boys over. I call them the Alabama boys. They're big, hefty men. One was a steel worker, actually.
Yes.
For 33 years, but he's turned himself into first-class research. The pilot did 600 tours in Vietnam. He's a tough man. The two of them started, a little old lady started like me, and had a little newspaper, and she got them to come in and meet each other, and then she left it to them, and then they built it from an alliance, which we're doing this month, and they built it, and 100% of the Alabama state parliament, every parliamentarian voted to evict United Nations from Alabama. But they tell me now, and I brought them over to talk here for a week. That's all I could afford. And they said that you've got to keep to one message, because they're turning the whole of America to communes, and they're doing this with connectivity of Gillard now. That you just have to keep on the message that it's about land, nationalising the land, taking away private property rights. And that was even mentioned openly in Agenda 21 and mentioned in my book. That was mentioned, but it seemed to pass over everybody's head.
Why is it because the journalists aren't across what's going on? Why is it that a lot of this just seems to be completely news to people? Is it because journalists aren't doing their job?
We were never told that it was about nationalisation of land. That's in my book. We were never told. I think there's that to it. I don't think... I would like to know whether it even went to a committee in the Parliament, but as I say, Alistair was deputy in the committee, and he never heard. So I think it didn't... Nobody were told.
So it's an inside club job, basically.
But what Keating had done beforehand, he'd had conferences just beforehand to bring local mayors into it, so he knew beforehand what they were going to do, bring them in. So they've got to ask questions. People didn't ask questions. I think the other thing is, when you look at it, unless you've got a lot of time, nobody has. And the people who are looking at now, small business people who are buying the book, I found 21 went to an ex-car salesman who ran, car yard.
Yes.
6 went to a man who ran a dry cleaning business. They felt vulnerable, but I said, before I knew about it, I'd said to someone who asked me what I thought was wrong, and I said, what I noticed, being old, is that I was close to the fact that the whole of Europe, we all were paralysed about 1935, because they didn't believe Hitler would do what he said he would do.
Yeah.
And I just think it's so beyond belief that reasonable Australians would not even think that might happen. Would you? I wouldn't have.
Well, we have a malaise of honesty, I suppose, about us.
It was always considered utopia. It always seen as utopia. We still think it was being too far away to happen, but I happen to be old enough to know that there were 6 divisions of American troops, 400 k's from the Australian wars. And I know how vulnerable we were at that time, and spoken to many people. But these generations wouldn't know that. And it just sounds as though people are playing word games.
Yes.
When they're deadly serious. It sounds like something you do on TV when people play board games, doesn't it?
Well, it does. But then you see, you get the words of Professor Schneider, for example, who you have in the book here on page 97. Stanford Professor of Climatology, the lead author, of course, of the IPCC UN reports, where he says, using environmentalism again to enact all of this, we need, he says, to get some broad-based support to capture the public's imagination, so we have to offer up scary scenarios, make simplified dramatic statements.
Well, I've said to people recently, what they've done is they've wasted energy on negative arguments. They're believing it's true because they're made to think it's true, and it's absolute... I've got a quote in there of how they sat down to think of the thing that would most deceive us, be likely to, deflect us from even noticing what they were doing. But it's just something so unimaginable out here, and the farmers who are been affected too, on their own. They've got no way of getting a voice.
They're out there. They're out there, aren't they? And here we are in the city. But
because we've got the huge cities, unlike Britain, where you're always amid the farmers. Yes. We've got a special problem, but the thing was to give a single target, to have a positive target that cut through it. And that's just up the front page of that book. I recommend everybody look at the story about Alabama.
Yes.
I only found out when I was going to printer, and I had only one page where I could put it without going to whether you have to have another 16 pages, all that. And I got on the phone. I rang Piers to see if he'd launch it, which he did.
Piers
I got
Ackerman,
on the phone,
yes.
and he said, I introduced myself. He said, where are you? I said, Sydney. He said, what, in America? I said, in Australia. Long silence. Because he had the answer. And I said to them that they were like Martin Luther, the whole of the Catholic empire, as it were, with the things on the door, said, that's what you've done. Yes. You've gone, started and done something, and it's now national policy of the Republican Party.
The catalyst that started it all.
It's too complicated. They say, what do the politicians do? They can't manage it. It's got to be rebels that do it.
Yeah, okay, so let me ask you about the group Get Up. How does... they're obviously influential, Simon Sheikh and friends. How do they fit in to this meta-narrative we've been speaking about the environmental movement, Agenda 21, the Fabians, international influences? Well,
it goes back to George Soros, who was a Hungarian Jew who was a Christian during the war. When the Club of Rome was formed, Gorbachev got the Club of Madrid, and Soros got the Club of Budapest and culture. He broke the Bank of England, took the money and started broking on coloured revolutions, orange or brown or blue, in a sway through Central Asia, Ukraine and so on and so forth, where he smothered them with welfare, which is what Gillard does daily, and makes them puppets, really, of now that you know how to get out of it. You get all these things, how to get out of it. That's our problem for Tony Abbott.
Addicted to welfare.
And then they broke, and then they get rebels, and they, like Greece, and they go to, they change the regime. He did that. His last one was Thailand, who finished up saying it was Dracula, ruins the finances of all of them, puts them in debt. And this is the thing we've got to think through and get out of here.
But he has links to Get Up.
No, he started Get Up with $1,500. No, not £1,500, pardon me, £1.5 million. Now, he gave that to John Hewson to start it with the Fabian Society. That was a man who was the secretary, had been a millionaire over in California, Combe, and the AWU man. He gave him $1.5 million to his seed money to do it. He brought over two boys who'd worked in America out of Yale, two Australians, in a very seedy program to get Clinton back called Move On, for which the IBM heir gave them a lot of money to do it. Was forming lots of little organisations who were exempt from having to clear the money they had. And that's been created here with Get Up. And Shorten and Combat and other people were from the Fabian Society were in it. The Australian Conservation Foundation, Greenpeace and others were all in it. And it tended to be eco-democracy, which they sort of sign people on the internet who agree with one of your ideas, tick it, and then they're members. They don't always know they are. They're only inquiring about it. And they got them. That was done by the people who'd done Move On in America, who've now moved on to a world organisation which they founded with Move On and Get Up in Avars in the world organisation. Now, somebody from Echo saw about this eco-democracy, they call it, which means it's not democratic at all. It's only pursuing one line dishonestly and doesn't have to clear the funds. Now, they should be shot out immediately because they don't belong to Australia. They don't come from Australia. They shoot people out of Parliament if they're not Australian. And they've got bigger and bigger, and they change the method of fraud each election. And, of course, I very quickly got into that and said to see whether the words Get Up came from the Internationale. And yes, of course, lo and behold, it does.
The Socialist Internationale.
The Socialist, the Communist hymn.
Yes. It's
in the Russian hymn, it was till recently. And the Get Up means Arise Ye Workers. It was Get Up in the original German. The national anthem in Russia was all over the place, every chorus. So, I mean, they give their game away. Now, they've gone on from strength to strength. Their behaviour and getting 100,000 names that were obviously false of people who hadn't enrolled, went to the High Court and won the case, was absolutely deplorable. Now they've got a new plan for the next election called Planners Alert. I recommend everybody look at it. It was the system that got people like Sartor and Unsworth into elections. So I think but I do know about Sartor because Kevin Ryan, who had introduced me to the man who said where all the false addresses came from. He'd gone round that could speak Greek. So The problem is that this question of the fact they have it up on the internet, that they had hackfists at Google's premises to learn how to move information fast on the internet. And it's run as a charity. It doesn't have to clear its money or where it comes from. So I expect them to be spotting all the places that are changing hands, green sides of parks, long sides of convents. As one man who did a habitation research in 1999, no, later than that, 2004, who said that pizza parlours were a favourite place for false names.
So what goes on with these?
So Planners Alert's got a map of the whole of Australia, pinned. If you have a look at it, it's got pins of all these addresses of places where they're changing hands. What on earth do we want a map to see whether we can see it for our own eyes if it's changing hands?
Got a for sale sign out the front.
No, and want to complain. It's a phony. And they now claim 600,000 members. It's a bit of a worry about the next election. And yet everybody gets diverted to the polls at every time. And it's the diversions that we have to just stop watching, because these are things that the public have to look at. Is the bin where you put your things in out of sight in the polling booth? Well, down at Cayman last election they weren't. It wasn't. You could put 10 false votes in there and you could go away and you could photocopy them.
No one monitoring.
Because they're the same type of colour as you can buy in Officeworks.
Before you go, immigration. It's a big debate topic at the moment. We seem to have a borderless society under this present regime. They've cut funding to customs. We've seen about 32,000 illegal entries over the last 5 years. 457 visas are at their highest level ever. What does the mass migration of people, particularly from different cultural backgrounds, have to do with the whole story?
It's a deliberate effort to destroy our culture. That is part of the things that they say in their objectives, is to destroy the culture. And the problem is they don't have no history of our democracy. They have no knowledge of our constitution. Where do you start to educate them? If they come places where they haven't had an education, do we really need people of different tribes? We become a nation of tribes. We've avoided that in our first early immigration after World War II, because I was well into my adult life then. And they had to be New Australians. They were called New Australians.
Yes.
They weren't allowed to be themselves. They had to learn the language. They put the language test in, that's gone. You had to have some language. And they've just opened the door, and Gillard is deliberately not doing anything to allow them in and to dilute the culture.
Would it be fair to say that for Julia Gillard and her ilk, these are not boat people, but vote people with a V?
Well, what efforts she really made, they're all diversions. She's deliberately left it open. And the question is, who's guiding Gillard? I don't think it's even her own cabinet, unless they have the same going down the same track. I don't know whether anybody noticed when the AWU, which did fight communism in the earlier years, all gave the communist salute. Did you see that on the
Solidarity Forever stuff?
in the paper?
Pump. Yeah.
And then they had a picture of her with her hand up in the air, giving the communist salute, hand in hand with the AWU secretary. Well, it says everything. Ross Garnaut, let us agree, Ross Garnaut has been the Trilateral Commission advisor for both Gillard and Hawke on economics and policy. The Trilateral Commission is immediately under the control of David Rockefeller, and 6 trilateral people are in Australia. If you look up your internet program, you'll see who they are. So that Ross Garnaut, who's a Trilateral Commission member, has been her economic advisor, so you can assume the guidance is coming from America.
So it's not coming from the union members, it's not coming from probably Cabinet, it's not even coming from that Scotsman John McTernan. it's coming from somewhere else, you're saying?
Well, they've always been international, this source of advice. I'm just having a look at the whole history of the Labour Party, where people were fighting the strand. From 1921, Moscow gold started to arrive. I don't really for a moment think it ceased.
Fascinating. Now, Dr. Amy McGrath, you've got the book out, as we said, which was the catalyst for this discussion, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing. You're into about your 150th reprint because it's so popular. If people want to get a copy, they still can, can't they?
Oh, yes, there's another print coming in. Only this time I'm charging. The free's gone. I'm charging the cost per copy, which is $10. But I do want to thank those people out there who've been absolutely fabulous in their response to it.
Well, thank you for writing the book. It's so much in there that is of importance. There's so much that people, I think, will learn. And it's been a pleasure having you in the studio to talk with us this morning.